My father kicked me out for refusing to sell the classic car I inherited from my grandfather. I was just 17 when my grandfather left me his 1967 Mustang Shelby GT500. That car wasn't just metal and rubber to him. It was a time machine that transported him back to his glory days. Growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, I'd spent countless hours sitting on his lap in that garage while he'd tell stories about cross-country adventures, and the summer he met my grandmother at a drive-in theater. Now, that legendary muscle car was nothing but a rusted hull collecting dust in our double-wide garage. Most kids in my high school drove their parents' hand-me-down Hondas or saved up for used Chevys. Meanwhile, I was working part-time at Splash and Dash Car Wash, making minimum wage plus whatever tips customers threw my way. Every dollar went into a coffee can labeled college that my mom kept on the top shelf in the kitchen. Not because I wanted to go to college, I didn't, but because that's what parents in middle-class Michigan expect their kids to do. My father, Rob, was an accountant who saw the world through spreadsheets and cost-benefit analyses. My mother, Linda, worked double shifts as an ER nurse and came home with dark circles under her eyes and stories that made us grateful for our boring lives. Then there was my brother, Alex, 21 years old and 3 years into a 5-year business degree at Michigan State, with student loans piling up faster than his motivation. Grandpa Jack passed away a month ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal. The funeral was on a Thursday, and by Friday, we were sitting in some lawyer's office while he read the will. Most stuff went to my grandmother, who was still processing her loss through a fog of grief and confusion. But then the lawyer cleared his throat and said something that made my father's eyebrows shoot up. And to my grandson, Jacob Allen Miller, I leave my 1967 Ford Mustang Shelby GT500, along with all associated parts and documentation. The car hadn't run in 15 years. The blue paint was faded and patchy, with rust blooming around the wheel wells. The interior smelled like old leather and memories. Dad saw a burden, a money pit that would cost thousands to resurrect. I saw the last connection to the man who believed in me more than anyone else. That thing is worth good money, even as a project car. Dad said over dinner 3 days after we were reading. We could put it toward Alex's tuition. He's got another 2 years, and those loans aren't going to pay themselves. I pushed my peas around the plate. Grandpa wanted me to have it. Your grandfather wasn't thinking practically, Mom chimed in. He was sentimental about that car. We need to be realistic. Alex stuffed half a dinner roll in his mouth. Just sell it, Jake. It's not like you know how to fix it anyway. That night, I went out to the garage and sat in the driver's seat. The steering wheel was cracked. The dash faded from years under the Michigan sun. But when I closed my eyes, I could still hear Grandpa's voice. This car isn't just transportation, Jakey. It's freedom. It's America on 4 wheels. The next morning, I called in sick to work and convinced my buddy Mike to drive me to see Old Man Henderson at the specialty garage across town. He'd been my grandpa's friend for decades. What would it take to get it running again? I asked, showing him photos of the Mustang on my phone. Henderson scrolled through the pictures, nodding slowly like he was greeting an old friend. Money, time, and somebody who gives a damn. He peered at me from under bushy eyebrows. You got any of those things, son? I had about $1,200 saved up. Time was something I could make, and as for giving a damn, that was the only thing I had in abundance. The fighting at home got worse. Every night was the same argument in different words. This is your chance to do something useful for the family, Dad insisted, waving Alex's tuition bill like a flag. Your brother needs this. We're drowning in debt from his education. It's the only thing I have left of him, I countered, voice breaking. It's a car, Jake. An object, not your grandfather. But it wasn't just a car. It was proof that someone had seen something in me worth investing in. I started spending my evenings in the garage, watching YouTube tutorials on auto restoration. I learned about rust removal and engine rebuilds, wiring diagrams and carburetor adjustments. I scavenged parts from junkyards and befriended the guys at the auto parts store. Every dollar from my paychecks went into the Mustang instead of the college coffee can. Mom noticed first. The cookie jar's empty, she said one night, giving me a knowing look. You're spending it all on that car, aren't you? I couldn't lie to her. Yes. She sighed but didn't lecture me. Instead, she slipped me a 20 the next morning. Don't tell your father. A week into my secret restoration project, Dad found the receipts in my jacket pocket. The explosion that followed made our previous arguments seem like friendly discussions. Words like selfish, ungrateful, and disappointment bounced off the kitchen walls. Mom tried to mediate, but Dad was beyond reason. You think you can waste money on a fantasy while your brother can't finish his education? He shouted. That's not how this family works. It's my money, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling of my hands. And it's my car. Not while you live under this roof. His face was red, a vein pulsing at his temple. You have a choice to make, Jake. Sell the car to help your brother, or find somewhere else to live. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, weighing my options. I could give in, sell the Mustang, be the good son, the practical choice, the adult choice, or I could choose the dream. By 3 a.m., I'd made my decision. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, my laptop, and the Mustang repair manual. I emptied my bank account, all $740 of it, and wrote a note that I left on my pillow. Asterisk, I chose his dream. Maybe someday you'll understand why. I'll be okay. Don't worry about me. Asterisk. As the sun rose over an arbor, I rolled the Mustang out of the garage using pure muscle and determination. The neighbor's curtains twitched, but I didn't care. Over the past week, Old Man Henderson had come by secretly after work to help me. We'd replaced the battery, cleaned the fuel lines, and gotten the engine to turn over just enough to start with a push. The car coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life like an old lion waking from hibernation. Black smoke poured from the exhaust, and the whole frame shook, but it was running. The beast was alive. I threw my bag in the passenger seat, turned up the broken radio that only produced static, and pulled away from the only home I'd ever known. 3 blocks away, reality hit me harder than the potholes rattling the Mustang's ancient suspension. What the hell was I doing? I was 17 with a car that barely ran, less than $1,000 in my name, and no plan beyond escaping my father's ultimatum. The gas gauge didn't work, but I could smell the fuel burning inefficiently. This machine wouldn't get me far. I had no job, no diploma yet, and a car that needed thousands in repairs that I couldn't afford. As I stopped at a red light, watching the temperature gauge climb dangerously high, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The Mustang shuddered beneath me, like it might give up at any moment. How was I going to survive on my own with nothing but a rusty car and pocket change? Where would I sleep tonight? What would I eat tomorrow? The freedom I'd felt pulling away from my house evaporated, replaced by the heavy weight of uncertainty. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas pedal, listening to the engine struggle. I had chosen the dream, but now I had to figure out how to live it. How would I survive alone when all I had was a rusty car and a few dollars in my pocket? That first night away from home hit different. I spent it in Sam's garage, my buddy from the car wash who didn't ask too many questions when I showed up with a barely running Mustang and all my belongings in a duffel bag. The roof leaked in the corner, and there was no heating except for a space heater that made alarming noises every time it kicked on. But the Mustang was parked right next to my makeshift bed of couch cushions, and somehow I felt like Grandpa was still with me, nodding in approval from wherever he was. Sam lived with his mom in a small house on the outskirts of an arbor. His dad had split years ago, leaving them with a detached garage full of motorcycle parts and tools that neither of them knew how to use. Our arrangement was simple. I could crash in the garage if I helped Sam figure out how to fix up the 3 vintage Harleys his dad had abandoned. Mom doesn't need to know exactly when you moved in, Sam told me while showing me where the bathroom key was hidden under a garden gnome. Just don't make noise before 7 a.m. and we're cool. My new routine was brutal. Up at 5:30 a.m. to shower before Sam's mom woke up. Bus to school by 7:15. Classes until 2:45. Then straight to the car wash until closing at 8 p.m. Back to the garage to work on the Mustang or Sam's bikes until my eyes couldn't stay open anymore. Somewhere in there, I'd scarf down whatever I could afford, usually ramen noodles or day-old sandwiches from the gas station. I kept my grades just high enough to avoid suspicion, but low enough that teachers didn't expect much from me. My attendance record became spotty. I'd skip PE on Wednesdays to pick up extra shifts at the car wash, and I'd miss Friday morning classes to hit the junkyard when they got new inventory. Money was tight like a noose around my neck. My paycheck from Splash and Dash, $10 an hour, minus taxes, barely covered food and bus fare, let alone car parts. I'd spend hours scrolling through forums trying to find aftermarket alternatives to authentic Shelby components that cost more than I made in a month. My diet consisted of whatever was on sale, supplemented by the occasional meal Sam's mom would insist I join them for. I learned every flavor of instant noodles intimately, and discovered that a jar of peanut butter can last 2 weeks if you're careful with your portions. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. 4 hours a night was my average, with the occasional crash session on weekends when my body simply gave out. I became friends with the night. The quiet hours when the only sound were crickets, distant traffic, and the metallic clinks of my tools against a Mustang's engine block. About 3 weeks into my garage life, I met Frank. He was a 65-year-old Vietnam vet who ran the local junkyard where I hunted for parts. At first, he barely acknowledged me beyond taking my money, but one day, he caught me trying to remove a carburetor from a '69 Dodge with the wrong tools. "You're going to destroy that thing before you get out," he said, shaking his head. His voice was gravel mixed with cigarette smoke, and he had the kind of leathery skin that comes from decades of sun exposure. "Who taught you to work on cars, kid?" "YouTube," I admitted. Frank snorted and took the wrench from my hand. "Watch closely. I ain't showing you twice." Frank became something of a mentor to me. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam before coming home to open his junkyard. Cars made sense to him in a way people didn't. When he found out about my situation, living in a garage to save my grandfather's Mustang, something changed in his eyes. "Your grandpa had that '67 Shelby? Jack Miller?" Frank whistled low. "We used to race together out on Route 12 back in the day. That man could drive like the devil himself was chasing him." From then on, Frank would set aside parts he thought I could use, give me steep discounts, and teach me tricks of restoration that weren't in any YouTube tutorial. Sometimes he'd show up at Sam's garage unannounced, toolbox in hand, ready to walk me through some complicated procedure. "Your grandpa would be proud," he'd say after we'd solved some mechanical puzzle, and those words meant more to me than any A on a report card ever had. I tried to keep a low profile at school. The last thing I needed was someone reporting back to my parents that I looked exhausted or malnourished. But an arbor isn't that big, and running into people was inevitable. About 2 months after I left, I saw my parents at Kroger while I was buying the cheapest groceries I could find. Mom looked like she'd aged 5 years, and Dad's face had a constant tension I'd never noticed before. They saw me too, but when our eyes met across the produce section, they both looked away and turned down another aisle. That night, I cried for the first time since leaving, muffling the sound with my jacket, so Sam wouldn't hear through the garage wall. Alex found me at the car wash a week later. He leaned against his Honda Civic, the one Dad had helped him buy, while I dried off some businessman's BMW. "They miss you, you know," he said, scrolling through his phone as he spoke. Like this conversation wasn't worth his full attention. "Mom cries sometimes. Dad's working overtime." I kept wiping down the car. "They know where to find me." "Yeah, living like a homeless person for a car that'll probably never run." He snorted. "You tanked your whole life for that piece of junk." I didn't tell him that the Mustang's engine block was finally clean, or that Frank had helped me rebuild the transmission. I didn't tell him about the nights I fell asleep studying repair manuals, or the sense of accomplishment I felt every time another component went back together correctly. Instead, I just said, maybe it's not about the car. As summer approached, I faced a new challenge. Without school, I could work more hours at the car wash, but the Michigan heat made the garage almost unbearable during the day. Sam and I installed a box fan in the window, which helped a little, but working on the Mustang meant burning my hands on sun-heated metal more often than not. Frank started letting me use a corner of his air-conditioned workshop on Sundays when the junkyard was closed. "Can't have you dying of heat stroke before you finish that car," he grumbled, tossing me the keys to his office. Just lock up when you leave. By mid-July, I'd rebuilt the Mustang's engine with parts sourced from 5 different junk cars, rebuilt the carburetor 3 times, and learned how to weld from Frank's nephew. The exterior was still a mess. Primer patches where I'd treated rust spots, mismatched panels, and a cracked windshield. But underneath, the heart of the beast was nearly complete. My birthday came and went without a call from my parents. I turned 18 in that garage, celebrating with a cupcake Sam's mom bought me and a set of spark plugs Frank gave me at cost. Adult life didn't feel any different from the day before. The day the Mustang's engine finally, truly came to life was an ordinary Wednesday in August. I'd been working on the timing for hours, making tiny adjustments based on Frank's instructions. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the garage door I'd left open for ventilation. "Try it now," Frank said, wiping grease on his jeans. I sat in the driver's seat, surrounded by torn upholstery and exposed wiring, and turned the key. The starter cranked, and then, like a miracle, the engine roared to life with a sound that shook the walls. It wasn't smooth. It backfired twice, and the idle was rough as sandpaper. But it was alive. After nearly 4 months of work, the Shelby's heart was beating again. I sat there, hands gripping the cracked steering wheel, and felt tears streaming down my face. Frank pretended not to notice, busying himself with checking for leaks around the engine block. Sam came running from the house, whooping like we'd won the Super Bowl. For that moment, everything was worth it. The hunger, the exhaustion, the loneliness. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just running, it was roaring. That night, after Frank and Sam had gone and the garage was quiet except for the occasional tick of the cooling engine, reality began to settle back in. I was 18, had barely graduated high school, lived in a leaking garage, and had no plan beyond the next car part. The Mustang might be running, but it was far from roadworthy. No brake lines, questionable wiring, and an interior that looked like it had been through a war. I lay on my makeshift bed, listening to the Michigan summer night, wondering what Grandpa would think of me now. I'd save his car, sure, but at what cost? No college prospects. A family that had ripped me off. A body that ached constantly from hard labor and poor nutrition. The victory of the day felt hollow as I stared at the ceiling. The engine was just the beginning. I still needed to do body work, upholstery, brakes, steering, a list of tasks that would take thousands more dollars and months more work. As I drifted off to sleep, the question haunted me. I brought the Mustang back to life. But could I keep going like this? How much longer could I survive on determination alone? I'd revived my grandfather's Mustang. But was I strong enough to continue this life I'd chosen? 3 years. That's how long it took me to transform Grandpa's rusted-out Shelby from a garage ornament to the beast it was meant to be. 3 years of bloody knuckles, empty bank accounts, and falling asleep with repair manuals as my pillow. I was 20 years old when I finally wiped the last speck of dust from that gleaming blue hood. The Mustang looked exactly like it did in the faded photo of Grandpa standing next to it in 1967. Right down to the hand-painted racing stripes I'd spent a week getting perfect. I never expected what happened next. A lot changed in those 3 years. Sam enrolled in community college, studying motorcycle repair after all the work we'd done on his dad's Harleys. His mom eventually figured out I was living in her garage full-time, but instead of kicking me out, she started cooking extra food and bringing me plates for dinner. She refused to take any money for rent, only asking that I help around the house when I had time, fixing leaky faucets, mowing the lawn, or handling small repairs she couldn't manage alone. Frank retired from a junkyard business, but kept his workshop open as a passion project. He'd let me use his professional equipment on weekends, teaching me skills that guys twice my age were still trying to master. The Mustang became our shared obsession. I bounced between jobs, the car wash, a local diner, overnight stocking at Walmart, and eventually landed at AutoZone, where the employee discounts saved me hundreds on parts. I was still broke, but a different kind of broke, the determined kind. My parents and I maintained a Cold War silence. I'd see them occasionally around town, and we'd nod like distant acquaintances. Alex graduated college and moved to Chicago for some finance job. He sent me a Christmas card once, which was weird but nice, I guess. The Mustang slowly came together. First the engine, then the transmission, the electrical system, brakes, and suspension. I sourced original seats from a collector in Texas who was parting out a wrecked 67. The dashboard took 6 months to restore properly. Frank taught me how to mix paint to match the original Shelby blue that had faded from the hood. By early 2025, the only thing left was detailing, polishing chrome, cleaning glass, and making sure every surface gleamed. The transformation was complete. Grandpa's car was reborn. The day I considered it finished was nothing special, just a Tuesday in April. I drove around the block 3 times, listening to the engine purr like a satisfied lion. When I pulled back into Sam's driveway, he was waiting with his phone. "Stand next to it," he insisted. "I need to document this for posterity." I didn't think much of it. Sam had been photographing the restoration process for years, partly for his own reference with his motorcycle projects. I posed awkwardly next to the car, still wearing my AutoZone uniform with grease stains on the knees of my jeans. He posted the photos on Instagram with the caption, "My buddy spent 3 years bringing his grandpa's 67 Shelby GT500 back from the dead. Hashtag Shelby Dream, hashtag classic cars, hashtag Mustang." The internet is weird. You never know what's going to catch fire. Maybe it was the perfect angle of sunset light on the Mustang's curves. Maybe it was a story Sam briefly told in the caption. Maybe it was just that the algorithm gods were feeling generous that day. Whatever the reason, the post blew up. By Thursday, it had 100,000 likes. By the weekend, over 500,000. Car enthusiasts flooded the comments, asking for specs and more photos. Sam's follower count jumped from a few hundred to 20,000 overnight. A local news station called First. We'd love to do a human interest piece on the young man from Ann Arbor who resurrected an automotive legend. I almost declined. Attention wasn't really my thing, and honestly, I was exhausted. But Frank convinced me it was good publicity for his workshop, so I agreed. They filmed me driving the Mustang through downtown Ann Arbor, the engine's rumble echoing off storefronts. They interviewed me in Frank's workshop, asking about the restoration process and why I dedicated 3 years of my life to an old car. It wasn't just a car to my grandfather, I told them, trying not to look directly at the camera. It was freedom. It was American engineering at its peak. I couldn't let it die in a garage. The piece aired on the local news, then got picked up by a Detroit station, then a classic car YouTube channel with millions of subscribers. Suddenly, people were recognizing me at AutoZone. "You're the Mustang guy," they'd say, showing me the video on their phones. Frank's workshop started getting calls from people wanting restoration work done. He'd just laugh and tell them, "I'm retired. Talk to the kid." About 2 weeks after the news piece aired, I received an email that I initially mistook for spam. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding your 1967 Shelby GT500 for film use." It came from someone claiming to be a vehicle coordinator for Universal Pictures. According to the email, they were producing a film about the American muscle car racing scene of the late 1960s, and they were interested in featuring authentic vehicles from the era. They'd seen the news piece about my Mustang and wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I almost deleted it. Hollywood reaching out to a nobody in Michigan over an Instagram post? Yeah, right. But curiosity got the better of me, and I forwarded it to Sam, who was better at spotting scams than I was. He called me 10 minutes later, talking so fast I could barely understand him. "Dude, this is legit." I checked the guy's LinkedIn and everything. He works for Universal's Vehicle Acquisition Department. They want your car for a movie. The next morning, my phone rang with a California number. I answered in the AutoZone break room, trying to sound professional despite being surrounded by half-eaten lunches and gossiping coworkers. The man on the other end introduced himself as Daniel Reeves, vehicle coordinator for Universal Pictures. His voice had that smooth Hollywood confidence that made everything sound simultaneously exciting and routine. He explained that they were filming a period piece about underground racing in 1960s America, and they needed authentic vehicles rather than replicas. The director was particularly interested in featuring a blue '67 Shelby GT500 as a protagonist car. We saw your restoration work, and frankly, it's better than most of the professional jobs we've encountered, Daniel said. The authenticity is exactly what we're looking for. Then he mentioned money, and I nearly dropped the phone. Standard rental for a vehicle of this caliber, with its screen time and usage requirements, would be in the neighborhood of $2 million for the 6-month shooting schedule, plus a technical consultant fee if you're interested in staying with the vehicle during filming. I actually laughed. I thought it was an elaborate prank, maybe orchestrated by Sam. $2 million? For my car that I'd built in a leaky garage? The same car I'd sacrificed my family relationships for? The car that had cost me maybe $30,000 total in parts over 3 years? Is this a joke? I finally managed to ask. Not at all, Daniel replied, sounding slightly confused. If you check your email, I've sent over our standard vehicle contract for your review. We can arrange for transportation to Los Angeles next month if you're interested in proceeding. I sat in my car during lunch break and opened the email on my phone. The attached PDF was 30 pages of legal language, but right there on the first page was a figure. $2 million for exclusive use of a 1967 Ford Mustang Shelby GT500. Chassis number, my grandfather's car's actual VIN, for a period not to exceed 6 months. This was real. Hollywood wanted my car, and they were willing to pay me more money than I would earn in 30 years at AutoZone. My head spun with possibilities. I could buy a house, pay for college, start my own restoration business, help Sam's mom fix up her place, buy Frank new equipment for his workshop. But then the doubt crept in. What would they do to Grandpa's car? Would they modify it for stunts? Drive it recklessly? Crash it for a scene? The contract mentioned reasonable wear and tear. But what did that mean to a film crew? I called Frank first. He listened silently as I explained the situation, then whistled low. That's life-changing money, kid. But what if they wreck it? What if I never get it back? Frank was quiet for a moment. Your grandpa didn't keep that car in a museum. He drove it hard. He lived in it. Cars like that were built to be used, not just looked at. I knew he was right, but it still felt like I was betraying something. This wasn't just any car. It was my connection to Grandpa, my rebellion against my father, my proof that I could finish something worthwhile. For 3 days, I barely slept. I read and reread the contract. I researched Universal Pictures' history with classic cars and their films. I even found forums where other car owners discussed their experiences loaning vehicles to Hollywood productions. Some had great experiences. Their cars returned in better condition than when they left, with professional maintenance and care throughout filming. Others told horror stories of damaged vehicles and battles with insurance companies. The technical consultant role interested me most. According to the contract, I could stay with the car throughout filming, advising on its operation and maintenance, ensuring it was treated properly. The pay was less impressive, standard crew rates, but it meant I wouldn't be separated from the Mustang. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I called Daniel back and told him I was interested, but with one non-negotiable condition. I come with the car, not just as a technical consultant on paper. I physically accompany the Mustang to every shoot, every transport, every storage facility. Where it goes, I go. There was a pause, and I imagined Daniel conferring with unseen executives in some gleaming Los Angeles office. That's unusual, but not unprecedented, he finally replied. We can accommodate that request. We'll need to adjust the contract to include travel and accommodation for you throughout the production schedule. One more thing, I added, surprised by my own boldness. I drive it to California myself. Nobody transports it but me. 2 weeks later, I signed a revised contract. 2 days after that, a wire transfer for the first payment hit my bank account. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. I gave notice at AutoZone, bought Sam's mom a new refrigerator she'd been eyeing for years as a thank you gift, and started planning my cross-country journey. Frank helped me prepare the Mustang for the long drive, checking every component one last time. California's a long way, he reminded me, And this old girl hasn't done more than local drives since you rebuilt her. We'll take it slow. I promised. Stick to the scenic routes. Make a proper road trip out of it. That weekend, a week before my scheduled departure, Sam and his mom threw me a small goodbye party. Frank came too, bringing a rare bottle of bourbon he'd been saving for a special occasion. We toasted to the Mustang, to Grandpa, and to whatever awaited me in Hollywood. As I looked at my gleaming blue Shelby under the garage lights, surrounded by the people who'd helped me when my own family wouldn't, a knot formed in my stomach. In just a week, I'd be on the road to California, and eventually, I'd be handing over the keys to strangers who saw my grandfather's legacy as just another movie prop. The contract protected me financially, but could any document really safeguard something so personal? Had I made the right choice, or would I regret entrusting my dream to people who couldn't possibly understand what it meant to me? News about my $2 million deal spread through an arbor faster than my Mustang could sprint down the highway. The local paper ran a feature calling me an Arbor's auto restoration wunderkind, with a full-page photo of me leaning against a Shelby. They framed it as some kind of American dream comeback story. The kid who chose a rusty car over his family and somehow struck gold. The headline read, "Local Mechanics Classic Car Gamble Pays Off with Hollywood Deal." Suddenly, people who'd never given me a second glance were treating me like a hometown celebrity. The manager at AutoZone, who'd grudgingly given me time off for car stuff, now bragged to customers about how he'd mentored me. Classmates from high school I barely remembered sent friend requests and messages asking if I needed investment advice for my newfound wealth. But I never expected what happened 3 days before my planned departure for California. I was in the garage doing a final oil change on the Mustang when Sam came rushing in, looking uncomfortable. Jake, your parents are here." My hands froze on the oil filter. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over 3 years, not since that day I'd rolled a Mustang out of their garage. "All of them," Sam added. "Your brother, too." I wiped my hands slowly on a shop rag, buying time to process this. Sam's expression told me he wasn't thrilled about their presence either. In all this time, my family had never once tried to find me, despite the fact that I'd been living less than 5 miles from their house. They were standing awkwardly in Sam's driveway, Dad, Mom, and Alex, looking out of place in their business casual clothes among the oil stains and scattered tools. Dad had more gray in his hair than I remembered. Mom had gotten thinner. Alex still had that permanent look of mild annoyance, though he traded his college hoodies for a button-down shirt. For a moment, none of us spoke. 3 years of silence stretched between us like a vast desert. Dad cleared his throat first. "Jake, you look good." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. "We saw you on Channel 7, Mom said, her voice brittle with forced casualness. "And in the paper?" Of course. They hadn't sought me out when I was struggling, sleeping on garage cushions and eating ramen for dinner. They came when they saw me on TV with $1 million car. Dad shifted his weight, hands in pockets. "Son, we've been doing a lot of thinking about how things went down between us." Alex nodded earnestly beside him, like they'd rehearsed this. "We were wrong," Dad continued. "About the car, about you, and we want to apologize." Mom stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. "We want to come home, Jake, before you leave for California. You shouldn't be staying in a garage when you have a perfectly good room at home." I looked past him to where the Mustang sat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The same car Dad had called a waste of time. The same car he'd kicked me out over. Now that it was worth millions, suddenly it wasn't a piece of junk anymore. "Where were you 3 years ago?" I asked quietly. "Where were you when I was sleeping on couch cushions in a garage that leaked when it rained? Where were you during Michigan winters when I was working with a space heater that could barely keep me from seeing my breath?" Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. "We were angry, hurt. We thought you'd come back once you realized how difficult it would be." "But you didn't," Dad added, almost accusingly. "You're stubborn, just like your grandfather was." The mention of Grandpa from his lips felt wrong somehow, like he was invoking a name he had no right to use. The thing is, Alex chimed in, wearing his business major confidence like cologne. We're still family, and families forgive each other. Water under the bridge, right? I looked at each of them in turn. Were they really sorry, or were they just sorry they bet on the wrong horse? Would you be here if the car was still a project? If I was still making minimum wage at AutoZone? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dad's eyes darted to the Mustang, then back to me. Be reasonable, Jake. We couldn't support what looked like a self-destructive decision, but you proved us wrong. We're big enough to admit that. And what about the car? I pressed. If it were up to you today, would you still want to sell it? Dad hesitated just a beat too long before answering. That's not relevant anymore. You made your choice and it worked out, but I saw it in his eyes, the calculation, the mental math. Even now, faced with proof of its value, all he saw was a dollar sign. Not heritage, not passion, not craftsmanship, just profit and loss. Let me make sure I understand, I said, keeping my voice steady. You kicked me out for choosing this car over family. For 3 years, you didn't call, didn't check if I was alive, didn't care if I was eating or had a roof over my head. Now that I've signed a Hollywood contract, suddenly you're at the door with open arms. That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. We didn't know how to reach you. I almost laughed. I've been working at the same AutoZone for 2 years. I've been living in the same garage. Sam's mom has the same phone number. You didn't look because you didn't want to find me unless I came crawling back. Alex stepped forward, irritation breaking through his practiced corporate calm. Come on, man. We're trying here. Why are you making this so difficult? I took a deep breath and looked around the garage that had been my home, at the tools Frank had lent me, at the workbench Sam had helped me build, at the small refrigerator Sam's mom had put in so I'd have cold drinks while working. You know what the difference is between you and them? I said, gesturing around the garage. They helped me because they believed in me, not because of what they could get from me. Frank taught me to rebuild an engine when he was supposed to be retired. Sam let me crash here when I had nowhere to go. His mom cooked for me when I was too tired to make food. I turned to face my father directly. You saw a piece of junk that would cost too much to fix. I saw Grandpa's legacy. That's the difference between us. And $2 million doesn't change that. Dad's face hardened. The facade of reconciliation cracked, revealing the same stubborn disapproval I remembered from 3 years ago. So that's it? You're choosing that car over your family? Again, I already chose. 3 years ago. You're just mad it turned out I was right. Mom started crying in earnest now, and I felt a twinge of guilt, but not enough to back down. Not anymore. You want forgiveness? I said, maybe someday, but not today, not like this. You saw rust. I saw a dream. Now you have to live with that. I turned and walked back into garage. Alex called after me, something about being childish and holding grudges, but I didn't look back. I closed the garage door behind me and returned to the Mustang, the only family member that had never let me down. The morning of my departure dawned clear and cool, perfect Michigan spring weather. Frank arrived early to help me do a final check of the Mustang systems. Sam loaded a cooler with drinks and snacks for the road. His mom pressed a Tupperware container of homemade cookies into my hands and made me promise to call when I reached each stopover. California's a long way, she said, not for first time. You're sure you don't want to fly and have the car shipped? We've been through too much together, I told her, patting the Mustang's hood. Besides, what's an adventure without a little risk? The drive out of Ann Arbor was surreal. Streets I'd known my entire life suddenly felt temporary, like they were already memories. I took a deliberate detour past my old high school, past the car wash where I'd worked, and finally past my parents' house. I didn't slow down this time. There was nothing left to say. Interstate 94 stretched before me, the first leg of a journey that would take me across the heart of America. The Mustang's engine sang beneath me, a deep, confident rumble that said we could handle whatever lay ahead. Frank had installed a modern GPS system disguised inside a vintage-looking radio housing. His parting gift to me. Call me when you hit Chicago, he grumbled, pretending the moisture in his eyes was from allergies. And don't drive this beauty like you stole it. Those first hours on the open highway felt like freedom in its purest form. Windows down, music up, nothing but road and possibility ahead. This was what Grandpa must have felt when he first drove this car off the lot in '67. The intoxicating promise of the American highway. I crossed from Michigan into Indiana as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The farmland rolled past like a living postcard of Middle America. Gas station attendants did double takes when I pulled up, and fellow travelers at rest stops came over to admire the Shelby. That's museum quality, one old-timer told me at a truck stop outside Gary. You don't see craftsmanship like that anymore. I didn't tell him about the contract or the movie. This journey wasn't about Hollywood. It was about honoring the road that had brought me here. I spent that first night in a motel just outside Chicago. The Mustang parked directly in front of my room, where I could see it from the window. Sleep came fitfully, my mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The enormity of what I was doing. Driving across the country to a place I'd never been, to work on a movie I knew nothing about, finally hit me. But when morning came and I fired up the Shelby's engine, those doubts melted away. We had a date with Route 66, the mother road that had carried generations of dreamers westward. The next few days became a blur of endless horizon and changing landscapes. Illinois gave way to Missouri, then Oklahoma, the terrain gradually transforming from lush farmland to rugged plains. The Mustang performed flawlessly, as if it had been waiting all these years for exactly this journey. I stopped at roadside attractions that Grandpa might have visited in his day. The giant blue whale in Catoosa, the Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, the midpoint of Route 66 in Adrian, Texas. I took photos to send to Frank and Sam, evidence of our shared achievement, cruising across America. Nights were spent in roadside motels with neon signs and morning coffee served in styrofoam cups. I met truckers and tourists, drifters and locals, all drawn to Shelby like it was some kind of rolling museum piece. Their questions and admiration became a comforting ritual. New Mexico brought red rock formations and desert air that smelled nothing like Michigan. The Mustang's engine ran hotter in the desert climate, but the cooling system updates Frank had insisted on proved their worth. We climbed mountain passes and descended into valleys, the landscape becoming more dramatic with each passing mile. Arizona's painted desert took my breath away, layers of red, orange, and purple rocks stretching the horizon under a sky so big it made me feel insignificant. I pulled over just to stare, thinking about how small my problems back in Ann Arbor seemed now. I was somewhere outside Flagstaff when my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Daniel from Universal, checking on my progress. "Just making sure our star car is still on schedule," he said cheerfully. "The director is getting excited to see it in person." The reminder of what awaited me in Los Angeles sent a now familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety through my system. The Mustang wasn't just my passion project anymore. It was about to become a movie star. Would Hollywood change it? Would Hollywood change me? As I watched the sun setting behind distant mesas, painting the clouds in golden light, I couldn't help wondering if I was driving toward a dream or away from one. The contract in my duffel bag promised financial security beyond anything I had ever imagined, but money had never been what this journey was about. Tomorrow I'd cross into California, the final state on my journey. What awaited me there, opportunity or regret, remained to be seen. I stood on the edge of the movie set in the California desert, watching my grandfather's Mustang tear across the sand in a perfectly choreographed chase scene. The camera crane swooped overhead. 3 stunt drivers in period-correct clothing hung out of vintage muscle cars in pursuit, and a helicopter circled above capturing aerial footage. All this commotion, this multi-million-dollar production, revolved around a car that had once been a rusting hulk in my parents' garage. And for the first time since this journey began, I felt like everything had been worth it. My arrival in Hollywood had been a culture shock that no amount of movies could prepare me for. I had driven the Mustang straight to Universal Studios lot, following Daniel's instructions to a nondescript warehouse in the back corner of the property. Inside, a team of vehicle specialists had been waiting to inspect the car, circling it like art appraisers at a museum. The director, A bearded guy named Marcus who wore expensive sneakers and spoke entirely too fast had practically hugged the hood when he saw it. "This is it," he'd said, snapping pictures with his phone. "This is exactly what I've been trying to describe to production team. The authenticity, the presence. This car has a soul." I want to say, "I know," but instead just nodded, still processing surreal reality that I was standing on a Hollywood lot while people in expensive clothes fawned over my grandfather's car. The first month was a blur of paperwork, technical meetings, and crash courses on how movie production worked. The Mustang underwent a thorough inspection by the stunt team, who kept telling me what an incredible job I'd done with the restoration. They needed to make some modifications for filming, a reinforced chassis for jump scenes, a second steering wheel on the passenger side for camera shots, hidden mounting points for cameras, but they promised every change would be reversible. "We'll return to you exactly as it came, plus all the upgrades," the head of the vehicle department assured me. Standard practice for hero cars. They'd made 3 replicas of more dangerous stunts, but the close-ups and key driving scenes would all feature the real thing, my thing. The contract stipulated that I would be on set for every minute the authentic Mustang was being used, with veto power if I felt they were pushing it too hard. My technical consultant role came with a small apartment near Venice Beach, nothing fancy, but with an ocean view that made me question whether I was living someone else's life. The walls were bare and the furniture generic, but I didn't care. After 3 years in a garage, it felt like the Ritz. Most mornings started before dawn. I'd meet the transportation team at the vehicle warehouse, supervise the loading of the Mustang onto specialized trailers, then follow them to whatever location was scheduled for that day. Sometimes we'd be in the actual studio, sometimes in the canyons north of L.A., sometimes out in the desert where we could really open up the engine. The crew quickly dubbed me Mustang Guy, a nickname I didn't mind. Most of them were decent people who genuinely cared about their crafts. The camera operators, the lighting technicians, the stunt coordinators, all experts in fields I'd never known existed. About 2 weeks into production, I met Ellie. She was a stunt driver with short dark hair, a permanent half smile, and more certifications in precision driving than anyone else on the team. Unlike most people in L.A., she didn't feel the need to fill silence with chatter. She approached me during a lunch break while I was checking the Mustang's brake lines after a particularly aggressive driving sequence. "You rebuilt this engine yourself?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. "Every bolt," I confirmed. She nodded approvingly. "My dad restored a '69 Charger when I was a kid. That's what got me into stunt driving. I respect anyone with the patience for a ground-up restoration." That might have been the end of it, but the next day she found me again, this time with specific questions about the carburetor setup. The day after that, we ate lunch together while discussing the finer points of vintage suspension systems. By the end of the week, she was showing me her favorite driving roads in the canyons above Malibu. Ellie saw L.A. through a different lens than the industry people. Born and raised in California, she knew hidden taco stands that made the best carnitas in the city, secret beaches where tourists never ventured, and mountain roads where you could test a car's handling without attracting attention. On weekends, when the Mustang wasn't needed for filming, she'd take me exploring parts of California I'd only seen in movies. Joshua Tree National Park, Big Sur, the Salton Sea. Sometimes we'd take her modified Subaru WRX. Other times, when I needed to give the Mustang regular exercise to keep it running smoothly, we'd cruise Pacific Coast Highway with the windows down. It wasn't dating, exactly. Not at first. Just 2 people who appreciated machinery and empty roads. But somewhere between late-night diner conversations and sunrise drives along the coast, something changed. The silences between us became comfortable rather than empty. 3 months into production, I realized I was falling for her. The movie itself was a period piece set in 1969, telling the story of underground street racing in Southern California. The Mustang belonged to protagonist, a Vietnam veteran returning home to find his brother involved in dangerous racing circuits. The plot was formulaic, but the driving sequences were spectacular, especially with talents like Ellie behind the wheel. I spent most filming days watching monitors in the video village, wincing each time the Mustang took a hard corner, but marveling at how beautiful it looked on camera. The cinematographer had a special fondness for shooting at magic hour, that golden time just before sunset, when everything glows with warm light. The Shelby blue paint against California desert backdrops was breathtaking. Marcus, the director, often sought my input on how the car would sound, how it would handle in certain situations, how a real driver that era would approach a corner. My garage education with Frank proved more valuable than any film school degree could have been. 5 months into the 6-month shoot, the first payment installment hit my bank account. Until then, I've been living on the per diem and consultant fees, which are generous but not life-changing. The first $1 million of the car rental fee, however, that was different. I called Frank immediately. "I want to repay you for everything you taught me," I told him. "Let me buy you new equipment for your workshop." "Keep your Hollywood money," he grumbled, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "Just tell me they're treating the Shelby with respect." I promised him they were. Then I called Sam and his mom, insisting on paying for Sam's college tuition and buying his mom a new house, something without a leaky garage. They protested but eventually accepted, understanding that this wasn't just gratitude. It was family taking care of family. With the money secured and the film nearing completion, I started thinking about the future. The contract would end, the Mustang would return to my possession, and then what? Back to Michigan? Stay in California? The horizon suddenly seemed full of possibilities I'd never considered when living day-to-day in a garage. Ellie found me one evening sitting on the hood of the Mustang after a desert shoot, watching the sun sink behind distant mountains. "You look lost in thought," she said, climbing up beside me. I shared my uncertainty about what came next. She listened quietly, then suggested something that hadn't occurred to me. "You know, LA has a huge classic car culture. People with more money than skill who want their vintage cars restored properly. You can open your own shop here." The idea took root immediately. Not just any restoration shop, but one specialized in the kind of authentic, ground-up rebuilds that have become my expertise. A place where craftsmanship mattered more than speed of delivery. I could call it Shelby Legacy, I mused aloud. Ellie's eyes lit up. Perfect. Over the next few weeks, between filming the final scenes, I researched commercial properties, business licenses, and equipment costs. With Ellie's help, I found a warehouse space in Burbank that had previously been an aircraft parts manufacturer, high ceilings, concrete floors, and enough square footage to accommodate multiple projects simultaneously. By the time filming wrapped, I had signed a lease, ordered equipment, and started the paperwork to establish Shelby Legacy Restorations, LLC. The concept expanded beyond just a business. I wanted to create opportunities for kids like me who had technical aptitude but needed guidance. A portion of every restoration fee would go into a foundation providing scholarships and apprenticeships for teenagers from troubled homes. I remembered how Frank had believed in me when no one else did, how Sam had given me shelter when I needed it most. Now I could be that person for someone else. The wrap party for the film was held at a mansion in the Hollywood Hills, with sweeping views of the city lights below. The Mustang was displayed prominently on the lawn, spotlights highlighting its gleaming paint and chrome. Cast and crew who had become friends over the last 6 months exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. Promises that would mostly be forgotten in the carousel of Hollywood production schedules. But some connections were more lasting. Ellie stood beside me, her hand casually intertwined with mine, as Marcus made a speech thanking everyone involved in production. When he specifically acknowledged Jake and his beautiful car, without which this film wouldn't have the soul it does. The crowd applauded, and I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with money. Later that night, as Ellie and I drove home along empty streets, the Mustang's engine rumbling contentedly, she turned to me with unusual seriousness. "You know, you made something beautiful out of something everyone else had written off as junk. That's rare." She wasn't just talking about the car. 3 months after production ended, with Shelby Legacy Restorations open for business and already booked solid with projects, I received a letter forwarded from my old address in Michigan. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a feature from the Detroit Free Press about the Michigan mechanic making waves in Hollywood's classic car scene. Alongside it was a brief note. We saw this and wanted you to know we're proud of you. The door is always open if you want to talk. Love, Mom. No mention of the money. No apologies for the past. Just a simple acknowledgement that perhaps, finally, they saw me for who I was rather than who they wanted me to be. I placed a letter in the glove box of the Mustang without responding, not out of bitterness, but because I wasn't ready yet. Some wounds heal slowly, and some bridges need careful reconstruction. 6 months to the day after I first arrived in California, I asked Ellie to marry me. We were parked at a lookout point above Malibu, the sun setting over the Pacific, the Mustang's engine ticking as it cooled beneath the hood. She didn't hesitate. Obviously, yes. No grand gestures, no elaborate proposal. Just two people who understood each other's rhythms, who shared an appreciation for things built with care and precision. The film premiered almost exactly 1 year after I'd signed the contract. Walking the red carpet felt surreal, like I'd somehow slipped into an alternate reality where garage mechanics got to attend Hollywood premieres. Ellie looked stunning, in a simple black dress, more comfortable in this world than I was, but happy to guide me through it. Critics praised the movie's authentic feel and spectacular driving sequences. The Mustang became something of a star itself, with car magazines featuring on covers and automotive YouTubers begging for tours of my shop. Business boomed. The foundation established its first scholarship program, and the Mustang, now safely housed in a climate-controlled garage at the home Ellie and I had purchased in the hills, remained a daily driver, not a museum piece. Grandpa would have wanted it that way. Some evenings, when the California light turns golden and the air cools just enough to make driving with the windows down perfect, Ellie and I take the Mustang along Mulholland Drive. The engine still sounds exactly as it did the first time I got it running in Sam's garage all those years ago. Sitting on our back deck afterward, watching the sunset with Ellie beside me and the Mustang parked in the driveway, I sometimes think about how different my life would have been if I'd made the safe choice. If I'd sold the car, stayed home, followed the expected path. My grandfather didn't just leave me a car. He left me the courage to believe that some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone else sees only rust and wasted potential. He left me a compass pointing toward authenticity in a world that often settles for good enough. Maybe someday I'll call my parents. Maybe I'll even drive the Mustang back to Ann Arbor and park in front of their house, coming full circle. But not today. Today, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, building a legacy of my own, one restoration at a time. The greatest restoration, it turns out, wasn't the car at all. It was me.